The Wars of the Roses have put Edward IV on the throne of England. Lorenzo de' Medici's court shines brilliantly, and Duke Galeazzo Maria Sforza plots Milan. But this is a changed world, and medieval Europe is dominated by the threat from the Byzantine Empire. Hello and welcome to Liam's Lyceum. I'm your host, Liam, aka Hemvar, and today I'll be doing a spoiler-free review of John M. Ford's The Dragon Waiting. The Dragon Waiting is a 1983 standalone novel by John M. Ford, and this was the buddy read for May for those curious. And now, I really enjoyed this book, and I'm just going to go over a few things real quick. There's a lot that can be, for example, spoiled in the back of the version of the book right here that you're seeing, this newest version, so I wouldn't even read the blurb on the back of that thing. And I'm not going to spoil it like it does on the back of that book, and that thing's not even accurate anyways. But suffice it to say, this story is about the people, but it is in a different setting. But it's not really about the setting. I know a lot of historical fiction is really about like, ooh, what's different? And there are some things different here which are cool, but it's not really about that. So the story actually starts in Gwynedd, which is part of Wales, by the way, with Hal Parader, who is, well, he says he's the king of the Romans. So take that as you will. You can kind of tell because they have different dating systems. So you can tell it's the 15th century or about 1425, maybe hereabouts there specifically. But the dating system, again, is from the founding of Constantine's city, so Constantinople. Also, there is a dating system about the triumph of King Arthur. So Hal's actually just an orphan boy, and the important thing seems to be his meeting of a prisoner, a Byzantine magician caught by some English soldiers of Henry VI. And then this story, you'll notice, kind of throws out historical figures all the time. A knowledge of Florentine, French, and English rulers and others of import from the early Renaissance and the War of the Roses period specifically for England would be really helpful going into this. It's interesting how sometimes it's like the end of the medieval in England, but this is already well into the Renaissance in Italy. Though, in reality, Christianity's never flourished, but Rome did fall still to the Goths, so it's interesting. Some people, I would say that the Renaissance is still a thing, but if you're looking at it, the fall of Rome, it is. If you're looking at the dominance of Christianity, then, well, since that never happened, you basically just have pantheons in all the cities rather than cathedrals. And also, Islam's never really flourished either. So Byzantium is rather just flourishing still. Especially since this is a little bit after, especially the latter part of the book, a little bit after Byzantium traditionally had fallen to the Ottomans, I believe. Now, the story does keeps on setting up things. In the first part, that is the first 3 chapters, just so you're aware. Chapter 2, for example, is titled Gaul, and it's, for those not knowing, it's the name of France, basically, roughly. And it seems to be about 40 plus years, actually, after the first part. And this one follows Demetrius Ducas, who is the son of the local leader in Alesia, which is important, but not that important. But so it's under Byzantine control, though, and though the west of France is actually in English control, so I'd imagine sort of an Angevin Empire border. And again, note that there's a lot of people here that don't worship Christ. Almost no one actually does. And so it's very interesting. For example, in this chapter, we see the cult of Mithras, for example, which is still thriving. Now, the Ducas line has given rise to 2 emperors in the past, but have not ruled for centuries, though the line is still strong and noble still. And so, in a way, Demetrius himself is also sort of a king, like Hal thinks he is. And, well, you just have to read to see really what it's like. And chapter 3, again, introduces us to another character, Cynthia, who is a Florentine physician, daughter of a physician as well. And she seems to service the Medici, or the de facto rulers of the Republic of Florence, again, during what we call the early Italian Renaissance period. Well, actually, this is probably middle, or high Renaissance, actually. Or no, that's maybe slightly before high Renaissance. Yeah, anyways. So we get some glimpses here of things that are going on. You actually get a decent amount set up in chapter 2, more in chapter 3, and then it just keeps on building from there. But again, after this part begins part 2, and then there are 5 parts in total. Now we do have another 4th character who does not get an introduction. There's also a character mentioned on the back of the blurb of one of them who's actually not an important character, so I don't know why that person's mentioned. Anyway, so the first part is the most fragmented, and I know some people say they have a difficulty with this book, but that is really the most difficult part. And honestly, that's the only part where the characters are really introduced. So second gets to the meat of the story, as talked about in the back of the book. And not all the characters are actually always together throughout the story, but it's not too hard to keep track of, especially starting with part 2. But do pay attention as things shift quickly somewhat, and reality seems rather fluid, especially at certain parts. But I don't think it's as confusing as, say, Book of the New Sun, which it does get some comparisons with sometimes. But again, you should be paying attention. That being said, though, the vocabulary is super, super simple. It's not hard at all. At least I didn't feel like it was hard at all. But this is somewhat of an adventure novel, hence why Scott Lynch wrote an introduction to the latest Tor version. It's actually also very cinematic, actually like a movie, but with more emotion. But it goes from one action scene, which isn't necessarily combat, to the next very rapidly. That's kind of what I mean by cinematic. And there's also kind of a murder mystery element at some point. It's also kind of coming of age. There's really about friendship and love. Again, it's really about the characters, and they are good characters. So I thought it was great. I thought it was awesome that you got different views, for example, on the origins of King Arthur, just like today, the Welsh say he's Welsh, the Scots say he's Scottish, etc. And then we also have Richard of Gloucester, who plays a rather benevolent role here. He's kind of partially in the background, but in the forefront at the same time, at least through other characters' eyes. And there's, again, the other character that does not get an introduction chapter, is a German man by the name of Gregory. He was very interesting and depressing, and honestly, a lot of the characters do have that trauma that kind of makes them somewhat depressing as well. But overall, I love the characters. I thought the story was great, and the world building done well, since it mixes history and fantasy so expertly with things like sorcery and some other, I wouldn't even call them supernatural, it's more of a disease, but I don't want to spoil it because I just feel like that's just fun to discover. Again, I didn't find it hard to follow. Some might, maybe I was missing something. But most of the historical characters I already knew, and some, so I would maybe read up a little bit on that. And I think you might have a little difficult time if you're not paying some attention, especially at some parts, especially since it's not explaining everything to you anyways. I mean, if you're just skimming through it, I think you'll be fine. You might be a little confused, but it should be fine. But anyways, Liam Williams Lyceum is kind of rambly, but I hope it was productive for something. So I really enjoyed Dragon Waiting. I want to read more by John M. Ford now, and if you want to talk more about this and maybe some other stuff, you can come join the Discord. It'll be linked below. I'll catch you next time.